a shaper from the Philippines
Yeah,
tag, and you haven't transferred yet. How does that work when you move?
I just turned alumni, so I will be officially alumni next month, July 1.
Okay, so happy alumni,
Yeah.
whatever position. I don't know if you get a gift or more work. Knowing the WEF, they probably ask you to do even more. But thanks so much for joining. And again, to everybody, the story here is that I was inviting global shapers from the Asia Pacific region for the Singapore session yesterday, or this morning, which is also Singapore kind of Asian times. And it turns out that Richard is in New York. So ta-da, that's why he's talking at this time. And please introduce a bit yourself, the work you're doing, and anything else that may be relevant to understanding how this group here could become wiser faster.
Sure. I'm just going to share my screen also. Everyone see that?
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. Little bit of a background about me. My name is Richard Dacalos. You guys can call me Decal. As Marcelo said, I'm a global shaper, originally from the Manila hub. And I'll talk a little bit more about my story and how I ended up in New York. I was actually born here, but I lived most of my life in the Philippines. I've been an educator, I would say a little over a decade, a coach for almost the same amount of time. I've been an entrepreneur for about 10 years, yeah, a decade as well. I created a board game that simulates what it's like to set up a business. I've put that aside, and now I'm working as an innovation consultant here in New York, working with top retail brands. So I guess that's about me. I wanted to make sure that this conversation is a little bit more interactive, so I'm going to keep it short. So that you guys can ask questions if you have any. If you do have any questions as well, like you could try to put it through the chat and maybe I'll see it and then I can try to sneak it in there. So I'm gonna pretty much just tell my story and then you guys are open to ask questions about it. I already talked about myself. I'm very big into games, as you can see. I speak around gamification, game design. Lately, it's more been about innovation and social impact. I also spent about 4 years as a public school teacher, working with underserved students in the Philippines. Some people would say the poorest of the poor. I don't like using that word. Mostly, I'd say they're underserved and marginalized more than anything. But to start off, I guess I already told you I'm from New York. I was born in New York, born in Brooklyn, but it didn't stay that way for a long time. I actually ended up moving to the Philippines when I was about 8 years old. And really, it was a whole new world for me. I considered myself Filipino, but when I moved to the Philippines, I was treated like a foreigner. As you can notice with my accent, it's very, very thick. I sound American, and I was treated like I was an American as I was in the Philippines. And there's a very long history of colonialism. Philippines was a former colony of the United States, of Spain for about 300 years. So there's a lot of cultural dynamics about that. And it was really difficult for me as a student, as a young kid, to try and figure out where I belonged. But I did know growing up that I wanted to be either a teacher or a soldier. And I usually joked that I probably would have ended up as a soldier if I had enough height. I'm not really that tall. You can't really tell through a webcam. But a lot of my high school, and some of you I think are already around that age, I believe that's where I really found my voice and I found my community. Early on, when I was a freshman, I started joining hip hop events and I was a part of the underground hip hop community in the Philippines. We'd make albums, make songs, and it was a funny thing. We connected through chat rooms like this, but I'd say with my age, the chat rooms weren't as sophisticated. And we would meet up and end up creating music together. And one of the things about Filipino hip hop then was that it was very much like it was treated like a joke. Now everyone really loves hip hop, but it wasn't really popular. So I found myself moving to my own beat. And I would say that going through this community and going through all of that, I learned a lot of different things. And I'm going to be sharing about what I've learned in every different phase of my life. Because if you saw, the title of this is really, what do you do when who you are doesn't have a job title? So what I learned from being in the underground hip hop community is really that community is key. And over the years, that's really taught me something, that people come first. And when you're dealing with people and you learn from people, that's where you get your strength during the hard times. And if any of you want to become an entrepreneur or see yourselves developing your own business, it's not easy. The media news tries to make it look like, oh, it's $1 billion company and it happened overnight. It doesn't work that way. The second thing I learned is practice and perseverance. When I started in the hip hop community, I was one of the first. After college, I stopped for a while. And what happened is that the people who started later than me stuck to it. And those people are now pretty popular in the Philippines, pretty big in the, when it comes to music. They started the first Filipino rap battle league, which has pretty much the most number of views on YouTube to any rap battle league in the world. After that, after high school, I ended up in college and I took a degree in philosophy. The main reason why I took a degree in philosophy was because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And in the Philippines, you had to choose your major before you go in.
Yes, this is a kid talking.
And so for me, I chose a major that I thought would teach me the most. And in the end, I ended up with philosophy, and with philosophy, I think I'm going to try to mute everyone. There I go. So the question is, what the hell do you really do with a philosophy degree? And for me, the greatest thing about taking a philosophy degree is you're usually set to the path to either becoming a lawyer or you become a teacher, which is something I did eventually become. But more importantly, it taught me critical thinking skills. And I do believe that's one of the most important things you need nowadays. And it allowed me to forge my own path. So I ended up getting into real estate. This is me dressed up as a 60s, 70s basketball player at a real estate rally. And I would sell man-made islands, and I was a part of, I'd say, the problem. You know? But one thing that did teach me, I was very good at sales, and I realized at that point it was the best training ground. What I learned from that is that we are always selling. Even you're selling yourself to a future college, you're selling yourself for a job. So sales is critical. Your ability to present ideas clearly and your ability to speak to other people and communicate is critical, especially nowadays when people are losing jobs left and right and everything is volatile. Second thing I learned is if you're doing something you can't love or even learn to love, it's not sustainable. I did not love selling real estate. I spent about 3-4 years there. Met some people I didn't want to meet, some very dirty practices, and I tried to stay away from it. And in the end, I started my own sales practice. But in the end, it wasn't where my heart was. Where my heart was really teaching. In the end, I ended up becoming a teaching artist. This is me dressed up as a newspaper zombie. And we would perform after-school programs. We would teach art, and I would teach writing and performance. And that's where I really found myself, because we did the same programs for kids and we did those programs for adults. We just changed the language a little bit. And that's where I learned how to become confident with who I am, regardless of it all. And what I learned there really was to say yes to adventure. But more importantly, you need to calculate your risks before you jump and take the leap to say yes. When I started, when I did this, I already had savings in the bank from real estate, and it would have been stupid for me to jump to this job, which only paid about $5 a day in its first month. I wouldn't be able to survive. So I think it's really important for you to understand what are the facts, like how much money do you have saved up, and how much it would take for you to be independent. And these are things you can start asking yourself no matter how young you are. And it'll give you a clearer picture of like the steps you need to take to grow. I eventually created my own business, and it was a collective of professionals that try to solve social problems through business. We went to the Web Summit in Dublin. I ran several programs for youth leaders. And parallel to that, I was also a teacher, as I mentioned. And people even made memes about me. And that was like the highlights. But in the end, I would have students who would say something like this, which necessarily says something, it's like your mother. Very crude, and people would say that to me. But what I learned from that experience was I needed to understand things on the ground. You may want to solve a problem, but you can't understand that problem unless you immerse yourself. So I think one of the most important things is that you ground yourself in experience and not just theory. Eventually, I created a 300-person event. Entrepreneur Magazine called it a definitive twist to collaboration. The idea was to bring professionals from different disciplines together to solve social problems and collaborate. But one of the things is you can see that event, but the very first version of it was actually this. It happened right after one of the largest typhoons in the Philippines and in the world at the time. And it was just people walking through a parking lot. And what I realized from that experience is that it's about team and timing, and it's who first before what. I couldn't have done the 300-person event without this team. Most especially because at the same time, I had my part-time job as a teacher, and I was running another business at the same time. Eventually, that led me to try and capture all of my experiences. And I asked myself the question, there's got to be an easier way. So I ended up creating a board game, more a tabletop simulator that shows you how to set up a business and all of the ups and downs through it. I ended up doing a 40-city tour, 16-city tour over 40 days, promoting our Kickstarter. We successfully funded, but at the same time, after all of that, one of the agencies we were working with stole our money. Again, those are the hardships of entrepreneurship. What I learned, take care of yourself, because after that crazy 40 days, I ended up in the emergency room. And a lot of people sacrifice their health for entrepreneurship. One thing I know now is you really need to take care of yourself. And that means get the sleep that you need, eat properly. And now it's to where I am. And I'd say all of that led to where I am now in New York. And it's a big part of my healing. Because one of the things I did realize after setting up the business is that I went to see a professional to see about my depression. And I found out I actually had depression for almost 17 years without being diagnosed. It started in high school. I found ways to deal with it, but it turns out I've been disabled this entire time. And there were ways for me to cope with the help of professionals and with treatment. And this is my new normal. I'm here in New York. I'm an innovation consultant working with top brands and working with startups to help innovate in this new normal. And that's me. And I just wanted to share my story a little bit, but more importantly, I wanted to hear and find out you guys if you have any questions. And I think you're on mute.
Yeah, they should be able to mute themselves. That is really great because it's so relatable, right? The young age in which you started doing all of those crazy things and let me experiment here and there, and you actually managed to go much further than most people. I would say that the vast majority of people just dream about doing something while they're still in bed, and then they wake up and go like, oh yeah, it was just a dream. So you actually managed to go there and learn through the stress, the good stress and the bad stress, and then grow and gain wisdom as a consequence. So great story. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Actually, some of the work I did actually brought me to Davos and the World Economic Forum back in 2017. And it was very exciting, but at the same time, I did not know I was dealing with my own depression. And that's why I really do believe that it's important, even if you don't think you're depressed, to talk to somebody, especially now when the world is going crazy.
Yeah, and the problem sometimes is made worse when people say, oh, depression is on your mind. No, it isn't. It's a proper disease. It needs to be diagnosed. You need to go to some level of treatment depending on how serious it is. And it's important that you understand that you are at risk or you suffer from it as soon as possible. So I'm not saying that I wish any of you will suffer from this, but it's more common than you'd expect. So if you feel that you could be in that kind of situation, please talk to someone you trust and try to understand what you should be doing.
Are there any questions? I'm very
I have a question, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
You can go first.
Okay, thank you. So, Richard, in your
Decal,
my
you can
question
call me.
is,
yeah.
Okay, Decal, you created a game that simulates entrepreneurship. It's just a table game, or does it have an online version?
It's a table game. It's physical, role-playing game. I've put that kind of on the side for the last year, but hopefully within the next few years, I can restart it, maybe turn it into something digital. Right now, it's not one of my top priorities. I'd say even with my age, there's a lot for me to learn. And that's one of the main reasons why I'm here in New York. I put myself in one of the most competitive cities to see if I could make it.
Okay. Well, maybe you can have a wisdom game and you could be an advisor helping us out and have like a pro bono game on how to become wiser. We've been talking about that actually, so we can discuss this.
I think Natasha had a question. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, how did it feel for you to be known as like when you went to the Philippines, how did it feel when they kind of just didn't think of you as a Filipino and as a foreigner?
I think that's one reason why I seek community and a lot of my roles. And you notice I've done a lot of different things and I've had a lot of different job titles because nothing ever really fits. I think it was one of the reasons why I seek for community so much is because despite the fact that there was a connection with people, I felt so alone. And as teenagers, that's very common. And as a teenager, it increased more and my angst increased more. I let it out through my music, through hip hop. And I really do say that hip hop saved my life because without it, I wouldn't have been able to deal with that feeling of loneliness. It wasn't until I was about 18 that I dropped the American and Filipino American. And I just considered myself Filipino because I've lived there for so long. But I would still I'm light-skinned, so I would be treated differently. I speak differently. Filipino is most probably, like, it was the third language I learned, and I still speak it with a slight accent. So I still get judged by that, and judgment is just the way of the world. It really is how you can stand up to that. Eventually, I became a nonprofit advisor for a group that worked with Filipino Americans, and worked around identity and all of that. And eventually I reclaimed my own identity as a Filipino and a Filipino American, that even being American is a part of my identity when I claim it. And that takes a lot of work. I'd say try to find your people, try to find the people that you can talk to about these things. And I know that sometimes it could be hard to talk to the people who are closest to you. And that's finding a community where you can feel safe is so important.
Yeah, I just want to jump in quickly to mention that the Filipino national hero is called Jose Rizal. And I went to the Philippines in 2018. I was in Manila for a few days. I can send you the link I wrote about the battle for the Philippines, the Second World War. It's really, really long because I was in a 17-hour flight back home, so I kept on writing. And Jose Rizal was also different, right? So he was living in Europe, and he had, not only absolutely brilliant, like one of the most remarkable polymaths the world has ever known. The reason why he's not more famous is because he went back to the Philippines and tried to fight for the independence of the country, and the Spaniards didn't like it very much. So he was literally murdered by the authorities. But he was also different, right? So, and in this case, he became a national hero.
Yeah.
So in many ways, you could have being a national hip hop hero, or maybe Jose Rizal could have been a pariah, depending on how people would interpret his differences from the baseline of the rest of the country. I would love to continue this conversation, but our next speaker is already here.
Okay.
So if you stick around, I mean, he's super interesting. And Mark Prensky, I don't know if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, if ever for everyone here, you can send me an email, visit my site. That's d-cal.com. If you have any other questions, I'll give my contact information to Marcelo and he can pass it on to you guys.